when we speak about these types of experiences, that's also, what you also brought to the table in this conversation when you were talking about the why you got into coaching, is that you are essentially giving a person the tools for an experience, whether that's with physical training, whether that's with nutrition and fasting, right? So it's very like a lot of these things with coaching is like, oh, here's the program and do this, but it's not about that. The program is just a tool. Like, it's about what you will experience and feel, right? That will eventually change you and, lead to different things in different levels, right? So with the coaching, so run me a little bit through, because you started as a PT and then started online coaching, right? And what's your approach like at the moment?
Yeah, something I just wanted to add on what you said there is that, a lot of guys, I coach women too, but a lot of guys come and like, oh, you look great, man. I want to look like you or something. And what I want them to understand is that, no, it's not about looking this way. It's about becoming the person who can do the things that make you look that way. It's just an expression of something else. Okay. So when I did get into all of this,
like you said, like, people will see your results, right? And they'll end the information and they'll try to jump on that. But as I said, like, it's far bigger than looking a certain way, right? And it's important, as you said, and that I want to emphasize, like, that expression, it's an embodiment of these things that we were talking about before, right? So your values and your principles, because your priorities in life stem from those things, right? And once that has changed, you will have an external expression that is aligned with these things, right? And that's eventually in the coaching that we're both trying to achieve, is like, hey, it's not about the thing in and of itself. Like, think about, like, okay, who you are becoming, what you need to, because as you said, you need to become the type of person that has a body like that, or can lift that weight, or is able to do that skill, right?
Yeah, because if someone could give that body to you, like, instantly, you'd lose it, because you don't have the tools. You haven't built it yourself. You haven't learned what you need to.
Yeah, man. 100%. And I've had that conversation with other people. Like, if there's no effort involved, you also don't value it.
No, exactly.
If you didn't have to work for it, or you didn't have to put in any effort, and this effort can be, of course, there's a physical element to it, but the learning element as well. Like, if you understand yourself and you understand what you're doing, right, you put in the effort. Like, think of all your biggest achievements in life. Like, generally, they have come after like a huge amount of effort, and the reward is like, oh my God, like, I did it, Exactly. And that's also like, we're trying to kind of prime that mechanic by doing fasts. And that's something like why I got into fasting is after the health benefits and tried to do longer fasts, is like, this is a great way to feel good about myself.
Yes.
Like,
absolutely.
wow, like, I managed to, overcome this self-imposed adversity. And I've had the same effect with cold exposure. And I was doing cold exposure for quite some time. Then I had like a really stressful confrontation at work with a very hostile person. And that just kind of left me feeling like, oh, like I failed myself, and I was injured, really injured at the time. So I felt like I couldn't get to that point where, where I was already not feeling secure about myself. And then after that, I felt even more insecure about myself.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah.
And then like going into the cold exposure and like pushing that, rebuild that self-security, like, hey, like, I can overcome this and put in this effort, and like, I traversed this adversity, and now I feel much, much better about myself. Right. So I wasn't incapable after all. Right. So, and that's, a good experience to have.
Yeah. And it can, to someone like listening in the wrong way, or how I should phrase it, is that it could sound like, well, let me put it like this. If you do a 72-hour fast, you have now done something that most people think they can't do, and most people have never done. And it's not about wanting to feel better than other people, because that's what I'm thinking someone could think. But it's like, when I've done something that most people can't do, or that a lot of people would think is hard, then of course you will like yourself for it and feel good about yourself. So totally see what you're saying about, and also how these. I don't remember how you phrased it, but you said something about fasting, how it's a good tool for this kind of thing. Like like the cold exposure, I have not done as much as you, but I do the cold showers almost every morning. And that's something I think I wouldn't even have thought about that if I hadn't done the fasting before, because it's similar in a way, just it's more intense and shorter, but it's going through some kind of discomfort that makes you stronger in the end.
Yeah, man, exactly. So both fasting and cold exposures are stressors of different intensities, right? And they carry over into each other, because it's your ability to navigate a stressor, essentially, right? That's what it's about. And of course, fasting has its intense periods, but cold is much more acute. And if it's the more acute it is, right, the more present it is, the higher the sympathetic response to that, right? It's just like if you burned yourself, it'd be bang, right? But if you, the whole boiling the frog example, then nothing really happens. I mean, eventually, if you, would keep the heat going up on the stove, you take your finger away, but the damage is already done, right? You would have already been burned by that time. So that's the idea of the carryover there, is that with the fasting, as you said, you understand, okay, this is a type of stressor that I'm navigating, and it builds these mechanics of being able to raise your distress tolerance, right? So we have a baseline to deal with stress. That's where all the nervous system talk comes into play. But that's one of the beauties, again, on a completely different level, of fasting and cold exposure, that you can take that, I've raised my distress tolerance, my baseline has come up, right? So now I can try something else, and it just kind of keeps building from there on out.
Yeah, and maybe an odd example with this, but say it's something I've noticed with stressful situations that are nothing like these, like more just social things and stuff. Yeah. Like even these things will feed into that, because I'm thinking about, for instance, I when was it, 1.5 years ago, in the winter I just worked a little bit as a waiter on this brunch thing, actually a vegan brunch thing, which was kind of funny, because I would never have eaten any of that food, but I'm not used to this, trying to remember, okay, all these plates to these tables, so it is kind of a stressful situation in that way. But somehow, even when I feel a slight sympathetic drive or something like that, it's like my tolerance for that overall is much higher. So I'm not, say that I do this as I don't know, a teenager, maybe I'd be really nervous about it. And now it's more I do feel slight stress symptoms, but I'm so much better at dealing with it. I'm actually not that worried. I'm sitting chill in my driver's seat.
Exactly. Right. So that's the example. So not only does your baseline go up, right? So the baseline is just kind of, I would say, where does my stress go into that, a tipping point, right? So everywhere up until baseline is okay. Right. But additionally, the more you get better at navigating stress, right, the higher the threshold becomes. The threshold is what I would suggest or call the flow zone. Right. So you're aware of how flow kind of works, right? I think sort of you've been in the zone before.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Because you train, right? So it's kind of, you enter that okay, you're in the zone. That's the threshold, basically. You're not super relaxed, but you're relaxed enough, and there is enough stress that you're hyper focused without losing your edge. Right.
Yeah.
And then there's the level on top of that. When you do experience stress, you're much better at handling stress. Right. So when you've crossed that threshold, even then you'd be oh, I'm fine. Even though this situation is quite stressful, like I'm not losing control. As you said, good example, like you are still in the driver's seat, right?
Yeah.
And that can happen, as we were saying, from fasting, and then like cold exposure is just another extension of that, right? So the nervous system in that sense, it's kind of a misunderstanding or maybe a misconceptualization. People just don't know. It's not just like neurological, like psychological. Your nervous system runs through your whole body. It's both a hardware and software. And you change this by just doing these things, right? So you're literally rewiring.
Yeah, installing new software, better software.
Yeah, you're upgrading your hardware, installing better software at the same time.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing, right? And that's just from fasting. Like, come on, guys.
Yeah.
Right. But
absolutely.
It's so cool to hear you like say these types of things and like bring, people to these experiences, because